Jason Todd's childhood could be considered more of survival than growth, because growing up implies some level of safety underneath you. Jason didn't have that. He had Gotham streets, which is about as far from a safety net as you can get. His mother was gone. His father was in and out of prison. The neighborhood he grew up in was the kind of place that produced people who learn very quickly that nobody is coming to help them. So Jason helped himself. He figured out how to read situations fast, how to know who was dangerous and who wasn't, how to move through spaces where the wrong call got you hurt, how to take what he needed without getting caught, how to talk his way out of things, how to fight when talking didn't work. None of this was taught to him in any formal sense. It was accumulated through experience, through mistakes, through watching what happened to people who weren't paying attention and deciding he was going to be different. By the time Bruce Wayne found him trying to steal the tires off the Batmobile, he wasn't a lost kid waiting to be saved. He was already a formed person, already sharp and carrying a specific set of beliefs about how the world worked and what you had to do to survive in it. Bruce didn't get to him early enough to be the primary author of who Jason was. He got to him after the first draft was already done. And the first draft was angry. Bruce gave him a direction for that anger, gave him training, a purpose, a name, made him Robin. What Bruce didn't do, or probably didn't think to do, was deal with what was underneath. The anger got a costume. But it didn't get resolved when anger becomes belief. There's a version of this story where Jason Todd becomes Robin, and it works, where the structure and the mission and Bruce's guidance smooth out the edges and Jason becomes a different kind of person over time. That's not what happened. What happened instead was that Jason got good at the job, and the job confirmed everything he already believed. Every criminal he encountered, every night on Gotham streets, every situation where Batman's rules created a ceiling on what they could actually do, all of it fed something that was already growing. He stopped thinking of what they were doing as fighting crime. He started thinking of it as punishment, and those are not the same thing. Fighting crime is about stopping something, interrupting the action, preventing the harm, bringing someone into a system that deals with them. It's forward-looking. It's about what happens next. Punishment is about consequence, about making sure the person in front of you feels the full weight of what they did. It's backward-looking. It's about the debt. Jason shifted from one to the other, and the shift wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was gradual, built up through repetition, through watching the same criminals cycle back onto the streets, through watching Batman pull punches against people who weren't pulling theirs, through accumulating evidence case by case, night by night, that the system they were operating in had a structural flaw. And that flaw was Batman's refusal to do what Jason was increasingly convinced needed to be done. This is the part of Jason's story that most people skip over because it's uncomfortable. His logic wasn't irrational. That's the problem. The argument he was making, that leaving genuinely dangerous people alive to hurt more people is a choice with consequences, and that Batman owns those consequences, is not an easy argument to dismiss. Batman has let the Joker live through dozens of encounters. The Joker has killed hundreds of people. At some point, the math starts to mean something. Jason did the math and came to a conclusion. Batman's restraint wasn't a virtue. It was a limitation. In fact, worse than a limitation, it was actually a choice. A choice that had a body count attached to it, and Batman had decided that his principles were worth that body count. Jason disagreed. Deeply, fundamentally, in a way that went all the way down to his core. The anger had become a belief system, and once anger becomes a belief system, it stops feeling like emotion and starts feeling like clarity. Like you've figured something out that other people are too afraid or too comfortable to admit. That feeling is very hard to argue someone out of, especially when the evidence keeps coming in on their side. The consequence. Then the Joker killed him. Everything Jason had been building toward, the anger, the philosophy, the growing certainty that Batman's way was wrong, all of it got interrupted by a warehouse and a crowbar and a bomb. He died believing he was right. Died in a situation that was, in the cruelest possible way, proof of his point. The Joker did this. The Joker, who Batman had faced hundreds of times and never finished. The Joker, who was alive specifically because of the choice Batman kept making. And now Jason is dead because of it. That's not a small thing to come back from. Not psychologically, not spiritually, not in any sense. The Lazarus Pit brought his body back. What it couldn't do was bring back the person he was before any of this happened. The resurrection process isn't clean. It doesn't restore. It returns something. Something that has all the memories, all the feelings, all the unresolved anger, but destabilized, raw, like taking everything that was already volatile and removing whatever thin layer of control had been sitting on top of it. What came back wasn't Robin. Wasn't even the angrier, more disillusioned version of Robin that Jason had been becoming. What came back was someone who had died with a specific belief and returned with that belief hardened into something unbreakable. He came back and found out the Joker was still alive. That moment is the hinge. Everything before it is. Everything after it is a consequence. Because Bruce had a choice after Jason died. He could have ended it. A lot of people in his position would have justified it, would have found a reason, would have let grief do what grief sometimes does to the lines people draw. Bruce didn't. He kept the Joker alive, kept his code intact, and Jason came back to a world where his death hadn't changed anything. The system he had lost faith in before he died had continued operating exactly as he expected while he was gone. That's not a wound. That's a confirmation. The kind that doesn't leave room for doubt anymore. Red Hood. The Red Hood isn't an explosion. That's the thing people get wrong about Jason's return. He didn't come back and immediately started burning everything down. He came back and he planned, he watched, he learned what had changed and what hadn't. He built something methodical out of what he'd become, and then he stepped back into Gotham with a specific agenda and the capability to execute it. The Red Hood is controlled. That's what separates Jason from a simple revenge story. He's not operating on pure emotion. The emotion is in there. It never left. But it's been organized, structured, given a framework. He takes over criminal operations, runs them himself, on his own terms, with violence as the management tool. He's not trying to eliminate crime. He knows better than anyone that you can't eliminate crime in Gotham. What he's doing is controlling it, directing it, making sure the people who are going to do damage anyway are doing it within parameters he sets, toward targets he chooses, with consequences for stepping outside those parameters. It's a philosophy. A dark, brutal one, but a philosophy. He looked at Batman's approach. Total opposition to crime, zero tolerance, strict moral code, consistent refusal to cross certain lines, and built the exact inverse. Not chaos, not senseless violence. Just a different set of lines drawn in different places by someone who had personally paid the cost of where Batman drew his. The helmet isn't armor, it's a statement. Red Hood is Jason saying openly that he is operating outside the system Batman built, and he is not apologizing for it. The mirror. The confrontation between Jason and Batman isn't really a fight. It's an argument that neither of them can win. Jason puts it plainly. He lays out the logic. He points to the Joker, points to the body count, points to Bruce's choice and what that choice has produced over and over again. He's not ranting. He's making a case. Calmly, directly, with the specific precision of someone who has had a long time to organize their thoughts. And Bruce doesn't have a clean answer. He never does in this moment. Because Jason isn't wrong on the facts. The Joker has done what Jason says he's done. Bruce has made the choice Jason says he's made. The only defense Bruce has is the principle itself. That crossing that line changes something about who you are. That the moment you make that decision, you become something different and you can't come back from it. Jason's response to that essentially is, so what? So what if it changes you? If the outcome is that fewer people die, what exactly is being preserved by keeping your hands clean? That's the mirror the title refers to. Jason holds up Bruce's logic and shows him what it looks like from the outside, from the perspective of someone who was failed by it, who died because of it. And Bruce has to sit with the fact that his code, his most fundamental operating principle, has a cost, and one of the people who paid that cost is standing in front of him. The tragedy isn't that Jason became violent, it's that nobody dealt with what he was carrying before it got to this point. Bruce saw a sharp, angry kid from the streets and gave him a mission, gave him an outlet, gave him the skills to act on everything he was feeling. What he didn't give him was the thing Jason actually needed, someone to sit with the anger and work through what it meant and where it was going. The training happened, the mentorship didn't, and the difference between those two things is the entire story. Jason became more of what he already was. The streets made him angry and resourceful. Batman made him capable. Nobody made him whole. So he used everything he was given to build a version of himself that could function, effectively, lethally, with complete conviction, while carrying every unresolved thing he'd ever been handed. That's not a supervillain origin. That's what happens to a person when the adults in the room don't do their jobs. Why this matters? Jason Todd is worth studying because he represents a specific failure that happens in real life constantly. Not at the Batman scale. Not with the Lazarus pit and the crowbar and the warehouse. but the underlying structure of it. A person with real ability and real anger and no proper guidance, who gets just enough direction to become dangerous, but not enough care to become stable. That's not fictional. That's a pattern. The anger that becomes a belief system. The logic that builds up through accumulated grievances until it feels unassailable. The capability that gets developed without the emotional foundation to hold it properly. The moment where someone decides the rules that were supposed to protect them have failed them, so they're done with the rules. Jason's story is a case study in what unprocessed anger does over time when it's given tools and targets but never addressed at the root. It doesn't stay still. It doesn't dissipate on its own. It grows, organizes, finds a philosophy, and eventually produces a person who is completely certain they're right, because in some ways they are, but who has paid a price for that certainty that nobody should have to pay. The question Jason forces is the one nobody wants to answer. At what point does the system's insistence on its own principles become indistinguishable from the system protecting itself at the expense of the people inside it? Bruce doesn't answer that, can't. Because answering it honestly would require him to look at Jason and admit that the code he's built his life around has a body count. And one of those bodies got back up and is asking him about it directly. Jason never needed saving. He needed someone to take seriously what he was already telling them about who he was and where he was headed. He showed Bruce. Showed him early, showed him clearly, showed him in ways that were impossible to misread. Bruce saw Robin. He should have seen a person.